B-29 crews on combat missions were called upon to locate and identify Japanese merchant and warships. The intent of this video is to review how B-29 crews both identified Japanese ships and the clever method blister gunners used their pedestal gun sights to calculate the ship's length. We will walk through a ship length example calculation. This page from a declassified April 1945 21st Bomber Command Air Intelligence Report introduces the B-29's high-altitude ship recognition program. Bomber crew ship identification is important. 21st Bomber Command B-29s can report the location and type of Japanese ships while flying on combat missions. The observations are valuable in ascertaining the intent of the Japanese, and the Navy can dispatch kill forces to the ship's location. Ship type identification and location reportings are a vital part of the mission, and bomber crews will be trained in ship recognition and reporting. This map from a 1945 Chief of Staff United States Army document titled Atlas of World Battlefronts in Semi-Monthly Phases outlines the state of Japanese occupied territories as of April 1945. B-29s are stationed in the Marianas, shaded here, and for reference, newly captured Okinawa is here at this location. Bombers pass over Iwo Jima on their way to and from the bombing targets. Ship scanning would take place over this Japanese-occupied zone. B-29 bombers are not tasked with attacking ships at sea, but they can report what they see, as discussed in this May 1945 21st Bomber Command Manual titled Ship Shapes for B-29 Crews. The information reported while on combat missions will be relayed to Naval and Air Force's attack crews, which may lead to a sunk ship. The Navy will be monitoring B-29 ship reporting frequencies to take quick action if needed. Ship reporting could also have a direct effect on B-29 bomber losses. Anti-aircraft fire often comes from ships anchored in harbors. Destruction of these ships could lead to less Japanese flak attacks and follow-on missions. Both Japanese and merchant vessels should be reported. Warship recognition is important to distinguish between U.S. and Japanese ships. Because of combat mission factors such as bombing altitude, speed, atmospheric conditions, crew fatigue, and others, B-29 crews may, at a minimum, just be able to identify the vessel as either a merchant or warship. Ideally, bomber crews could also identify the merchant ship as one of the 4 types of commercial vessels or one of the 5 types of warships. Images, characteristics, and names of the 4 types of Japanese merchant ships are listed on this page include the Fox, Foxterre, Terre, and Sugar. Warships, on the other hand, are characterized by differences in hull design, faster speeds, armaments, and function. The 5 categories of IJN warships include battleships, aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers, and submarines, but usually seen solo. The battleship is the most easily identified. Ship type identification can occur at bomber altitudes up to 20,000 feet. At altitudes over 20,000 feet, it is likely the observer will only be able to identify the ship as either war or merchant. Japan has many more merchant ships than warships. It is more likely that aerial observers will see merchant ships over warships by many factors. This page illustrates ship type and ship positions in a naval task force versus a merchant column convoy. Naval task force destroyers will fan out ahead with carriers in the center. The carriers will be spaced to allow for maneuvering. Destroyers will also lead a merchant convoy with merchant ships in the center, and an escort carrier may or may not be present. This table lists the speeds of Japanese war and merchant ships with ranges from 39 knots for destroyers to 5 knots for small merchant ships. Aircraft carriers are in the middle of the pack between 18 and 30 knots. Ships rarely travel at their maximum speed, but this data can still be helpful. If a ship's speed exceeds 30 knots, it's either a destroyer, battleship, or cruiser. Characteristics of these warships are significant enough to tell them apart. A ship's wake might be used to help determine its speed, but it's best to ignore it. There is no value in using its wake for ship identification. Warship identification is simplified by the characteristic diversity of the vessels. B-29 bomber observers should be able to characterize a ship by type, not necessarily class within the type. This page lists the 3 types of IJN carriers from a June 1945 naval intelligence document titled The Japanese Navy. The silhouettes of the 3 Japanese carriers include the CV, Light CVL, and Escort CVE. Japanese carriers took their names from birds or dragons. Japanese ship length to beam ratios are listed on this page, with CV carriers viewed as long and boxy with aspect ratios around 9:1. This page lists features of Japanese aircraft carriers. Carriers are categorized by size, not shape. Aspect ratios for CV/VL carriers are around 9:1, and escort carriers at 7:1. Bows have shapes like in this shaded image. Sides have protrusions from gun batteries, islands, stacks. Never smooth. The tail end is a squared-off extended flight deck. Elevator shadows can be seen at any altitude. The elevator is located here. Characteristics and images of the Japanese CV-class aircraft carrier are shown on this page. The carrier displaces 28,000 tons, is 745 feet in length, and can make 28 knots. The gun battery, side protrusions, and elevators are shaded. Other IJN CV carriers are shown in this image. Characteristics and images of the IJN light aircraft carrier are shown on this page. The carrier displaces 7,470 tons, is 552 feet in length, and can make 26 knots. Characteristics and images of the escort class carrier are shown on this page. The carrier displaces 17,000 tons, is 548 feet in length, and can make 22 knots. This image shows a CV and escort carrier in Cure Harbor in March of 1945. At high altitude, this is a fidelity of view B-29 observers would see. The Yamato super battleship is here. No carriers are in this image. This is the B-29 naval contact form. Key rows include number and type of ships, including the ship length, location, heading, estimated speed, observation altitude, and visibility, where you fired upon, convoy type, and if the ship was a carrier, were its planes airborne. B-29 blister gunners can modify and use their pedestal gun sight to accurately measure the length of a ship. This information is extremely valuable in carrier type identification. I printed out these templates and taped them to my show and tell B-29 pedestal gun sight. From here, we just follow the 7 steps as outlined on this page. This is the location of the carrier relative to the gun sight. Given its characteristic shape, it has been identified as an IJN aircraft carrier. We will estimate its length to determine the type of carrier. Set the range handle to 20,000 foot altitude. Turn on the gun sight's illuminated reticle. Align the illuminated reticle center dot to the closest end of the ship. Rotate the target knob such that the ship's far end is framed by the illuminated target circle. The target dimension reads 60. Estimate the orientation of the ship relative to the gun sight using a clock system. The ship is at a 130 position. Read off the depression angle of 35 degrees. We can plug these values extracted into the ship length computer nomograph. Draw a horizontal line starting at the 130 clock position until you reach a 35-degree gun sight depression line, then down to the 60 target dimension line, then horizontal to read off the ship's length at 745 feet. The ship can be identified as a CV carrier given its length. At war's end, 25 of the 29 aircraft carriers built by Japan were sunk, as described in the September 1945 Assistant Chief of Air Staff document titled Impact, Air Victory over Japan. 4 were floating, but 2 of the 4 carriers still afloat were badly damaged. This table lists the 2 CV carriers and 1 escort carrier that were heavily damaged. This is Japan's only undamaged carrier at the end of the war. In summary, B-29 crew members were called upon to help identify Japanese ships while on combat missions. The blister gunners could use their pedestal gun sight to estimate the ship's length. This would aid in ship type identification. If you've enjoyed this B-29 crew ship identification deep dive review, please consider engaging with the video by commenting, liking, and/or subscribing to the channel World War II U.S. Bombers.